Welcome, Dr. Denise Gammonley, University of Central Florida. I'm so glad you were able to join us today.
Hi, I'm excited to be here. Good to see you, Karen. And I'm excited that students are interested in learning about social support and geriatrics.
Especially geriatric, which is your expertise coming to us from the University of Central Florida. I know that you've spent a lot of your career now looking at this particular area of care for geriatric populations. And I know that your dissertation was even on social support with older people.
Yep, that's right. Seems like a long time ago, but it was.
Yes, indeed. That takes us back. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let's have a conversation.
Okay. All right. So as Karen said, I've been working as a social worker, for longer than I can even count now. And when I was a practitioner, I worked in the mental health system and started out working in institutional care for people with severe and persistent mental illness. And I got really interested in working with that population and also in working with geriatrics. After all, I grew up in Florida, so that was always a hot area down here. So when I started my career as an academic, I wanted to pursue this topic of geriatric social work with mental health. And I learned that social support theory was going to be a really good choice for me to guide my dissertation work. So I kind of started with that. And I will tell you kind of how things have evolved. I'm going to start out with some definitions. And what do we mean by this construct of social support? Well, it goes by a lot of terminology. So as you're reading the literature, it's important that you kind of look for various language that's used here. So one sort of broad foundation is this concept of social networks, that we're all kind of embedded in social relationships and there's connections. So Karen and I are part of a social network, for example, of alumni of the doctoral program at UNC Chapel Hill. And that's part of one of our social networks, for example. So just keep an eye out for some of this terminology. So when you read this in the literature, anything for example, such as social ties, connections, integration, discussions or about companionship, providing assistance, all of these are examples of social support, the broad topic. So why is it important for older adults, and then how does it sort of work, and how do we as practitioners and researchers use social support to pursue our aims with older clients? Well, what's very interesting is that there is like buku literature for years now, probably going on 30 years, that looks at the benefits of social support for people of all ages, but I'm of course focusing on older adults. So we know there's substantial body of evidence from research that having good social support supports positive health outcomes for older adults. So for example, there's impacts on cardiovascular functioning. One of the very early studies of social support that really sort of made people stand up and look was, I don't know if you remember this, Karen, was they looked at women who were breast cancer patients who had advanced metastatic breast cancer and did a randomized trial where some of them were put in a support group and took part in a traditional kind of support group and they had longer lives than those who didn't participate. So it's really been researched for a whole variety of topics related to older people. One area that it's very important and very important part of driving the research agenda is in dealing with caregivers. So we also know from the literature, there's also a substantial body of knowledge that shows that if you lack adequate social support, it potentially increases negative outcomes, such as anxiety and depressive symptoms. One of the things that we study a lot in looking at working with geriatric clients is our outcomes related to well-being and quality of life. So for example, when you're working with people, and we're doing interventions, social work interventions, and examining research related to interventions for older adults, oftentimes we choose outcome measures such as well-being and quality of life for people of really advanced age or people at end of life. So for example, people in nursing homes, people that have dementia, for example, that maybe lack language or abilities to communicate with you. We want to look at outcomes that are meaningful for them, and well-being and quality of life are two that are examples. So we know that social support improves well-being and quality of life at the end of life. There's also literature to suggest that having good social support influences your overall mortality, which is kind of interesting.
So one
Karen,
of the
you and I,
that
when
would
we were
like,
prepping for this, I'm sorry, what did you say?
one of the things I'd like to underscore is that if you just did a general search in Google Scholar, you'd find just thousands of hits
Yes.
on social support research. So, and it really went through, when did it, what was the earliest studies? What does that date back to, the seminal studies, Denise?
Oh, probably the 70s.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So really where it started to become recognized that there was an impact on health, as you said, with the breast cancer patients, and
Right.
as you said, overall well-being. And one of the things I always found interesting about social support is that it appears that not only receiving social support, but giving social support.
That's my item here, reciprocity. That is really one of the most surprising things. When I think back of my dissertation work, for example, my dissertation, to put it in one sentence for you all, was a lay health advisor intervention for older adults that had severe and persistent mental illness that were served in by a mental health center in a rural community. And so we recruited and hired older adults, mostly women, to be their companion and friend and do things with them in the community and provide them transportation and various kinds of support. And one of my outcome measures was a social support scale, which I'll talk about a few slides ahead, the details of that, to look at different dimensions of social support. So when I was trying to decide as a researcher, gee, what kind of social support aspects am I going to measure for to determine the benefit of this intervention, I was really intrigued with this idea of reciprocity, which is the providing support to another person is potentially beneficial to you, as well as receiving social support from another. And it did turn out that that was one of my major outcomes, that I kind of assumed that the women who were in the study, who were the ones who were providing care to the people with severe mental illness, would have thought that they were, had reciprocity, that they were providing support. But much to my surprise, the people that had severe mental illness, when we looked at their measures, they also perceived that they were providing support to their designated helper, which I always thought that was like a really fun and happy kind of empowering kind of outcome. Anyway.
So they built a really strong relationship. And
it went both ways. So reciprocity, turns out, is a really underlies that whole kind of concept of that kind of support. Sometimes it goes by the name of integration support. I think I use that on the slide coming up. That really now underlies a lot of interventions and healthy aging kind of programming, is this idea of being able to contribute. And so you see my photo here, I stuck in, of people volunteering to reflect that. So let me just say real quickly about two of the major sort of theoretical foundations for for frameworks to understand why social support is important. Probably the more popular one, and the one that has more research behind it, is what's called the stress buffering hypothesis. And in a nutshell, that basically means that the function of social support, or the way it functions, is to help us cope with difficult life events. by reducing the negative impact. And that's different than the main effects kind of model of social support, that it directly impacts our well-being. So certainly there is research that shows, that supports both theories, but I think by and large, the majority of the literature is really guided by the stress buffering hypothesis. I'm going to move to the next one. Yeah. Okay, so if you're thinking about social support, whether as a practitioner or researcher or both, definitions are really important. So as you're reading all your literature on social support, make sure you understand how they've written and described it. And one way we kind of understand it or conceptualize it, as I've said, is who is providing the support. That's the concept of social networks, right? And one of the interesting things about social networks is that they change over our time, right? Or over our life course, I should say. And sort of related to that concept is this idea of social integration. So when you see that written about, a lot of times what we want to understand is the range and quality relationships. So Karen, I think this gets to the idea of appraisal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how people perceive. So some literature you will see, or some studies will have scales and survey items, or do interviews where people count how large their social network is, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that I, as an individual, perceive every individual as in that network as equally important to me or contributing to my social support. So that's where the appraisal piece, I think, comes in, the social integration.
I always think of appraisal support as when we were students, and I know my students will identify with this. When we were students, we would ask each other, hey, how did you do? Or how is that paper going for you?
Yeah.
And we give each other feedback. And sometimes I'm downward comparison. Oh, I'm doing better than Denise. But or upwards compare, where it's somebody that you want to be more like, which is really actually a positive thing to do, to surround yourself by people that you want to be more like.
Right.
And so appraisal, kind of like that. And it's almost like the mutual aid idea around people around you that are going through the same similar experience. So
right.
that really is part of the theory behind support groups, mutual aid groups.
Right. That's an important point. So there's a lot of different ways that social support is defined and described. And I've just listed here some of the more common categories and definitions. We've already talked about received support versus perceived support. So for example, when I think about older adults, and I think back to my clinical days, when I would go do home visits, and I would interview a client, and they would say it was an older adult who had some depressive symptoms. And we would have a conversation exploring what their, who helps them and who does things to, transport them, or, who the important people were. Someone who's experiencing a really serious depression would likely tell me, oh, no one ever helps me. No one does anything for me. I'm here all by myself. And then I would, as a case manager or therapist, I would do a little bit more of my assessment and explore that idea or that topic with other family members or neighbors or whatever. And I'd find out, well, no, someone's here every day. They've got their daughter that comes sees them every weekend. But the difference was, the person, because of their depressive illness, couldn't sort of wrap their head around, they couldn't perceive that they had social support, but in fact, they did have it, the received piece of it. So that's an important distinction. One of the more common ways we talk about defining it is breaking it into sort of subgroups, these dimensions. So instrumental, tangible support would be things like, I bring you a meal after your husband dies. And, you're bereaved and staying at home for a few weeks. So me bringing the meal is the tangible support. Help me think of some examples, Karen.
Well, I think about if my car breaks down, do I have somebody who can ask for a ride?
Yeah,
Or if
exactly.
I'm having a hard time making bills this month, I might be able to go to somebody who can, kind of like, do you have somebody you could turn to for $20?
Oh, yeah. In fact,
small
that's
but
an item.
meaningful.
That's always a survey item on some of them.
Yeah, so, that you actually can get something that you can lay your hands on, right? That's the idea of tangible. So
Right.
it's really important. Instrumental support's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, sort of the traditional kind of social service case management. Can you hook somebody up with someone to help pay their electric bill, those kinds of things. So emotional support, that's probably the easiest one to think about is, people in your life who express caring, kindness, connection for you. Okay.
And that's that whole, how are you doing today? Is there anything I can do to help kind of conversations we have?
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't, and I think what's interesting about this is that it doesn't have to be, like really intense emotional connection, but something very simple, like Karen said, like when I go to the YMCA, which I go to my yoga class frequently, you always know, I always notice at the front desk when they check in, who's the person who makes eye contact when they scan my phone to let me in, who makes a genuine connection with me, calls me by name, says hello, versus the person who just waves me right in. Okay. So there's that kind of connection. Informational support is really critical too. So information is just what it sounds like. So, think about this in the context of healthcare for older adults, in the sense that, who's the good doctor down the street that you went to when you needed your knee replaced, or, some very practical kind of pieces of information. That's stuff we can't really live without. Integration, I already talked about that. That was sort of the idea of reciprocity. So again, lots of different ways to define it. You will see other words aside from this. So what I was going to show you on the next slide, unless
and of course, that the one of the ways to define it is what we just already talked about was appraisal support, which is an important aspect of these dimensions.
Yeah. Okay. So this, I just wanted to show you a couple examples to see what this looks like. So I mentioned, let me go back to this one, these 4 categories: instrumental, tangible, emotional, informational, integration. I just want to show you a couple examples of like items that would be on a scale. And I couldn't find the whole scale, but I found, okay, I think you can see this here. I've got, okay, so this is a self-report instrument called the Perceived Social Support Scale. And it shows how this gives you an illustration, I think, of how emotional support can be thought of as distinct from informational support. Okay. And that would be one way to look at it. All right, now I got to figure out how to close this without losing my slides. Oh, can you still see my slides?
We've always seen your slides. We never saw the.
Oh, there we go. Oh, you didn't see the. Okay, you know what? I'm sorry, you didn't see the
instrument. No.
I think I have to stop share and reshare. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, now I got to put the other one on. That's why. Sorry. How's that? Okay.
Okay.
So I just wanted to show you a couple examples of items, okay, to show you how emotional support can be thought is distinguished. And this is just one scale, how they do it. Okay.
So you have has somebody comforted you by showing physical affection? Has somebody listened to you when you talk about private feelings? People showing interest and concern in your well-being?
Yeah.
So those are some of the basic questions that were asked in this scale.
Yeah, these are just example items, but just to show how you see and how that's very different from somebody giving you information that made a difficult situation easier to understand or suggested something you might do. Okay. So let me show you another one. I gotta flip back and forth here. So the Lubin social network scale is actually developed by a geriatric social work professor at Boston University. And it's been well validated. This one is widely used, not just in social work, it's used in all health and geriatrics because it has good validation on it. So let me see if I can make this one open. And then I'll have to stop and show you again. Hang on a second. Okay, share screen. Here we go. Here it is, I think. There it is. Okay, you should be able to see that, I think. So this is well validated. And his approach was to look very specifically at social isolation. And so he's, you started out this scale with probably 30 items, and they've got it revised now to it's shorter. And this one takes the other approach. Remember, I talked about the social network approach, and this is more about counting. Okay, looking at family. It turns out this is highly validated and predictive of a lot of outcomes that I mentioned. So it examines family and friendships.
So it's how often, how many.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
but you see, it doesn't
quantitative.
really get to the quality, right? Quite the same way that some other scales do. So anyway, just
let's see what the questions are. How many friends do you see at least once a month?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's
Yeah.
just trying to put,
Anyway.
just trying to put numerical values on.
Yeah. So this is, something that's well validated and used quite a bit. Let me go back to the slides. Okay. Okay. So what I wanted to do was to also show you, give you a couple examples how projects I've been involved with have made use of these concepts. I already talked about my dissertation back in the olden days. This project was a way I used social support as a particular, this wasn't really an outcome study, it was like a prediction study. So I worked a few years ago with a village program. I don't know if you're familiar with that. The village model is something that's taken off quite a bit in the United States as a community support of like an informal network of older adults that support each other through volunteer work, designed to keep people at aging in place at home.
So it's geography based, people living in neighborhoods.
Yeah, so neighborhood based. And it's kind of like, think of it as like a membership organization that you might belong to. Like if years ago, people belonged to the Lions Club, well, they still do, I'm sure, the lodge or something like that. But these village programs are specifically designed by older people, for older people, to help them remain in place and at home and stay in their own homes. And so they have elements of social support, but they also have elements of emotional kind of social support, but also very practical things. Like, for example, the village in my community of Winter Park, Florida, is called Neighbors Network. And one of the things they do is, like, let's say somebody has to move to a new location. Some of the village members might all get together and come over to the house and help them pack up and move. It's very, but it's within this context of, and they also kind of connect people to other tangible supports like plumbers and people that can help repair homes and all that.
So so if they're going to come and help you pack up to move, that's instrumental support.
Yeah.
But if they're going to help you find a plumber, maybe that's informational support.
Exactly. Good explanation. So I got involved when Neighbors Network was just launching a few years ago. They were just putting this network together, and they were really struggling and trying to improve membership and trying to figure out basically how to market themselves to the potential members. And so I did kind of I always think of this as like a marketing study. I did a survey of a group of older adults and looked at and had them identify particular aspects of their, life that would potentially predict their interest in joining, their likelihood of signing up for something. So the ultimate question was, would you, on a scale of 1 to 7, how likely would you be to join a place like an organization like Neighbors Network if it was made available to you? So that was the purpose of the study. And one of the things I did was try to organize my predictors based on a good theoretical model. And so I put this slide in here just to illustrate how social support is really connected to and a part of other theories that we rely on in social work and health as well. So for example, the health behavior model talks about your likelihood to engage in particular healthy behaviors. In my case, it was the likelihood to join this organization. There's some predisposing factors that you bring to the table. There are things that enable you to make it easier. And then there's aspects of need that make you think about it. So think about joining an organization like that. So I conceptualized social support and isolation as a potential enabling factor. And so I used actually the Lubin scale. So I don't have all the details here to show you the outcomes and all that. But I will tell you, much to my surprise, the presence of social support did not really predict their likelihood of joining that organization. Much more important was if the older adult perceived that their self-rated health was poor. So the way I think about that is people that had good social support already didn't feel the need for an organization like Neighbors Network, whereas those that the need factors were most predictive. So that's just one example of how it could be used. The other one I'll show you, this was a really fun project. In fact, I just had a conversation with my colleague before this meeting. So I work with a colleague from the Rosen College of Hospitality Management. Okay, so this is, here in Florida, of course, we have a huge, in Orlando especially, tourism and hospitality industry. And so she comes at the work from that business perspective. And one of the challenges they have in that industry is trying to get employees to work appropriately with older adults and not be ageist and those sorts of things. So we worked together on an intergenerational gardening project a couple of years ago, where we brought students from the university together with older adults who attended a neighborhood lunch program and our university arboretum to work together. In the arboretum has a huge garden area, and they worked together over a semester and worked on the vegetable garden. And then at the conclusion of the semester had a large event that was hosted by the hospitality students, etc. So I threw that in here because I think it's a wonderful example of informational support, integration, and emotional support. So it was really a reciprocal activity. So the older adults had as much to teach the students working in the garden and working on their hospitality event as the older adult, or as the students had to teach them about or connect with them on a more emotional level. So we're going to try to submit this to USDA for they have some funding for these community gardening kind of projects. So this was really a fun kind of social support activity. Okay. Let me go to the next one. I think my last one. These are just a couple more examples to share with you. So this is one I'm gonna have to go back, flip back and forth here like we did. Hang on a second. This doesn't, is not really a, wait a second. This just shows you the outcome, and really, it doesn't really show you too much. But so during the pandemic, during the fall of, I guess it was the fall of 2020, or spring of 2020, when the pandemic hit, I teach a service learning course for students. I guess it was the fall of 21. I teach a service learning course where my students go to an adult daycare center and learn about delivering social support in person. Well, all of that was shut down, right? So what we switched to was a remote project. I did complete remote instruction. My students never set foot in the daycare center, which is run by Easter Seals. But we worked on a social support project for the family caregivers of the members of this adult daycare, who are people with disabilities such as Parkinson's and dementia primarily. So my students worked to develop a set of tools, self-care and tools for caregivers. So I thought this was a good example of, again, sort of these instrumental and informational kind of support, because the students put together a package of materials that were all about what caregivers could do during the pandemic to engage with their elder when they were, had to remain at home, about what they could do for their own self-care. And then we also very tangibly or instrumentally here collected all kinds of wonderful gifts to promote their self-care. So we gave them things like candles and lotion and those sorts of things. So that was always like a thing, a project I always appreciated, how we actually were able to deliver something tangible to the people. And then the last one I'll show you is sort of to the future. Oh, wait a minute, I have to turn this off. Can you hang on a second. I've got so many windows open here, I can't find what I'm doing. Can you see my screen?
We're looking at your PowerPoint.
Okay, all right, let me click on this. Okay, sorry, I had too many windows open, lost my place. So really exciting, and this is actually this.
No, we're not seeing anything.
Okay, I'm going to do it right now. Okay, show taskbar. Okay. Okay, I'm having trouble finding it now. Can you see my slide?
We can see your slide.
Okay, well, you know what? It's just a picture. I can't figure out how to make that open now. It opens on my screen, but I've lost the thing that says share screen. Toggle subtitles. So we'll just this is the last one. I'll just tell you about it. It was just a picture I wanted to show you because it was the picture of a robot. So this is sort of a new area for me, and I've been working with colleagues in our Department of Psychology and Computer Science that have developed, and this is not just us doing this at UCF, this is happening all across the country. The picture I was going to show you was of MIT, to try to use what they call social robots to engage isolated older adults that are homebound, and sometimes also in residential care community kind of settings as well, like assisted living or nursing homes. So my colleagues have developed in psychology, it's kind of like a plush toy, but it's built around a robot that will connect and sort of kind of if you think of kind of an Alexa kind of interface to communicate. And so what we're doing with this is trying to connect with a community organization that provides care management services to frail and homebound elders who are very frail and isolated, and to deploy the robots in their homes, and then to see how these folks interact with them, or don't, and if that has any impact on their perceived social support. So these programs are happening in a lot of places across the country, and as the pandemic, fortunately or unfortunately, helped kind of drive this. So it's really kind of an interesting way to think about social support. So I don't know what you all think. Is that really social support if it comes from someone, from something, from a device rather than from a human? I don't know, Karen. That's sort of a philosophical question, I guess.
Well, I guess it's the perceptions of whether I feel like I've been supported. That's the only thing that really matters, isn't it?
Right, right.
So
Yeah.
I think that, and we need to be looking at how we use technology to enhance what we do as social workers, by all means. It's hard to imagine, but there was a time in which it was hard to imagine having cell phones to do social work.
Right.
So, anything's possible. One of the things that I always like to make sure that my students are kind of stimulated to think about is the fact that many people in society never really get that much of a social work direct touch, but they are indirectly affected by the programs that we develop to support and strengthen communities, community outreach, making sure that that tangible support's available, like food kitchens, or pick up your groceries at the food bank. So there are many things that we do as social workers that is almost like an indirect touch, because we can't touch everyone, nor should we really. We need to strengthen communities to help people take care of each other. So that's the reason why I think social support is so important in this particular course for Foundations of Social Work.
Well, I would go further and say that social work is all about social support, really. When you think about it, it's really our, when I'm in interdisciplinary meetings and people are talking from their respective disciplinary perspective, you can guarantee that it is always the social worker in the group who's going to bring these topics up. It's not going to be the other medical professionals, etc. So I think this, we own it.
Yep.
In a way. Yeah.
We always do. So I really appreciate your time. It's been interesting to hear the kinds of things you've done there at Central Florida in terms of getting students engaged in the community. I think that always thinking about creatively for our own community, and I'm just pleased to see how well you've been doing there. Great.
Well, this has been fun, and I hope everyone has a good afternoon, evening, whenever this class ends. Not sure.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gammonley.
All right. Thank you.